before calling upon my friend Ponting, may I just say a few words. The object of Captain Scott's expedition were not only to discover the South Pole, but to increase our knowledge of that vast continent at the other end of the earth, only a small part of which has so far been explored. Captain Scott was one of the first explorers to make a special feature of photography in polar exploration. And in my opinion, this film will be a lasting tribute to his memory.
When we were pulling sledges all day long in the Antarctic in zero weather, the principal subject of conversation was always food. There was only one thing which seemed really worth talking about, and that was food. We talked about meals had in the past and planned for meals in the future, and we sometimes indulged in regrets about second helpings refused years ago. I recall a remark which Captain Scott made at this time. He turned to the others and said, "What fun it will be when we are home again and see this at the cinema."
Well, life in the hut or cabin, of course, is perfectly normal. But life can get a little bit, should not say serious, so much as dull and boring when you're pent up in your tent for a 3 or 4 day blizzard and you simply can't move out. You talk to each other till you get bored with each other. You may play a game or two, but it's too cold for that. And you will make the time pass as best you can. That's about all you can say.
But do you enjoy it?
Oh, I should think so. I've always said that the best 3 years of my life. And not only because of what happens there, it's largely the men themselves rather than the place. The companionship with fine chaps. There was Captain Scott in charge of us, pretty wonderful. Dr. Wilson even more. And one of my best friends, I suppose my best friend, was Captain Oates. And of course you know what happened to him. He walked out to his death. In fact, we've got the sleeping bag, which we did find afterwards.
In the evening we play cards, play drafts, play chess. Then there was lectures got up by the various members. Ponting used to lecture on his travels in Japan. Mears was on an expedition that proved disastrous. And Oates, of course, he used to lecture on horses and polo and army life, and various scientists used to lecture on their particular branch of science, you know.
We only got about 100 miles on the way, I suppose. And there, along about half a mile on the starboard bow, there was a tiny little black top of the tent sticking out, which one couldn't recognize as anything particular, but it was in a place where I hadn't expected anything to be. So I told the ponies to go on, making south on our track, and went over on ski quickly to see what this strange object was. Well, it was the tent. And my own feelings on that morning were I can't understand even now. It didn't seem right to shout to the party and tell them to come over. I tried signaling to them, and they didn't understand very well. But eventually I got them over. It didn't seem right to make camp.
Anybody who remembers anything particularly about the 1910-13 expedition remembers very little more than the sad disaster whereby we lost 5 of the chief men. They think of it as a misfortune, whereas I think it's quite obvious nowadays that it was outstandingly scientific importance, because mainly there were 7 scientists, 8 scientists went down, of whom 7 were associated with the University of Cambridge. Well, no other expedition before or since on the British side has had quite such a close connection with the big scientific university. And if I may say so without being offensive, our Cambridge men were, many of them, what they call 1851 research scholars, which is a...
It's rather interesting that we used the same ration as Scott had laid down, And we found that for cold weather sledging it was not sufficient. And we increased our ration to the Shackleton ration and were better off accordingly. I think Scott was working on rather a narrow margin. Well, now there again, you see, 5 men going on and 3 coming back. That party coming back had to open every bag of food and take out 3/4, neither more nor less, which was quite an impossible task. Being what they were, I've no doubt they took less rather than more, but it did make things extremely awkward from the point of view of the dividing up of the food.